Hi, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
Welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes, welcome. So first on the show today, we're going to be showing you the movie that we're going to talk about, the movie they don't want you to see, My Son Hunter, our movie, directed by Robert Davi, starring Lawrence Fox, Gina Carano. It's about Hunter Biden. We're close to making a big announcement, and in advance, we want to remind you of why it's never been more important that this movie gets out. In fact, by the time you see this podcast, the announcement may have been made and it's going to be how it's going to be released and all that. So stay tuned.
And also in the show, we're going to look at we're going to ask the question, what is going on in Canada? They're really, really nice in Canada until you're old and disabled. Then they're not so nice. They actually want to kill you.
And even sometimes young and disabled. So never let a tragedy go to waste. The media many in the media are trying to spin the death of Anne Heche, the actress, her tragic death, to fit their woke narrative. We bring you the truth that doesn't quite fit that narrative. And we look at how the attack on author Salman Rushdie reveals the cowardice of modern so-called liberals and modern so-called artists. And modern so-called libertarians like Boris Johnson, by the way. So this is worth telling you about and exposing.
And how a great play has been damaged by wokery. We review Here, There Are Blueberries.
Yes.
But we're going to start today
with the interview with Brian Godawa, the writer of My Son Hunter, the screenwriter of My Son Hunter. We're going to have a big announcement coming soon. If you want to be first to know about this announcement, go to mysonhunter.com, join the email list. It's amazing. The movie's going to come out. It's going to have enormous reach because of something we're doing. It's a great movie. So let's go over to the interview with Brian Godawa, the writer, and talk to him about how and why it's so important that the Hunter Biden movie is coming out. So we're joined now by Brian Godawa, the writer of My Son Hunter. Brian is a screenwriter, award-winning screenwriter, novelist. He wrote the screenplay for the movie To End All Wars, which starred Kiefer Sutherland. He is an amazing author, has written countless books of biblical fiction, which we'll talk about later. Welcome to the show, Brian. First question, really, concerning My Son Hunter. What was it like working with someone as talented as me?
Well, let's just put it this way. It was great. Oh yeah, no, it was great because we are still working on other future projects. So I have to say that. Yeah. No, actually, we have I actually do think we are a good team. I've worked with you on a couple other projects in the past, and doing a rewrite on the FBI Lovebirds, and I think that you and I have we get into a good rhythm, and we both know our strengths and weaknesses, and I actually, how can I put this? I like to write alone in the sense of when I'm working on it, but I don't want to just be a writer who just does the writing. I need, I need partners, I need co-writers, that kind of a thing. And so you and I work really well in that capacity. And of course there are different scenarios in the way that we've written, but in terms of you and I developed the story on the Hunter buying laptop. And then, I went away and wrote it and then did rewrites based on input and feedback and all that stuff, the usual way that scripts are developed. But
My Son Hunter, I mean, the movie is coming out very shortly. We're hoping to make, by the time you've seen this, by the time people have seen this, there may actually be an announcement about times and dates and a very unique and very interesting way of distributing the movie that we're very excited about. But for you, what was the starting point? What did you want to put in the movie or in the screenplay? What was important for you and why?
Well, the truth is this was the key area that we all, me as well as you and Anne and Magda, the whole team sort of talked a lot of this through, because we needed to be on the same conceptual stage, before we moved forward. But I can say that, we all kind of agreed that Hunter Biden is a tragic character. And we know that in this world of Hollywood, when Hollywood does a political movie, a political satire, it's just, it's just ruthless, heartless, soulless attack against their enemies, whether it's, Sarah Palin in Game Change or Vice, Dick Cheney, it's just an attempt to just destroy. And we went into this thinking, okay, look, we want to do a satire, and he's a tragic character, no doubt, but that provides us valuable human drama that we didn't want to just go in this. And you guys told me this, but I agreed. It's like, we didn't want to do just a raw political attack piece. No. We wanted to explore Hunter's own personal character because, as sad as he is fascinating, right? He's addicted to sex. He's addicted to drugs. We knew this, but we also knew that he had a very peculiarly dysfunctional, yet in some ways universal relationship with his father and his dead brother. So there was this powerful family element that also, like I say, all of us were drawn to that. And so the goal was, how could we deal with all this massive information on a laptop, also deal with, Hunter's personal issues and his family issues? It was quite what shall we say, just daunting, because there was a lot to deal with in the short time of a movie, and that we can get into later. But I think that was our goal.
Thomas Hardy was a great believer in that as well, and I think character is fate here with Hunter, and we all wanted also to explore how people reacted to his flaws. Of course, they wanted to help him, but people like Joe Biden, let's be honest about it, they spotted an opportunity also. He was the bag man. He was the guy out there doing the deals. He was the guy out there raising the money, getting the 86,000 a month for doing nothing, getting the 3 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife, being part of the Chinese investment fund, working in partnership with all these state-owned Chinese government companies. We've ruined your script, haven't we? This is what all writers say.
Yeah. Yeah, actually you have, but at least I did get a chance to make my arguments for all the things that you should do that I would have done if I was in control. But can I go down the path of what you were talking about there? The one thing that I did that I felt like that I was inspired to bring to the mix was when you guys called me up and said, okay, we want to do a movie on Hunter's laptop, but we don't know what to do. We don't want to be a documentary, right? And that probably I'm so glad. I mean, I approached this at first seriously, like, can we do a serious drama and all this kind of stuff? But as I thought about it, I realized there's so much information on the laptop. You've just, you've brought up a few things, but there's all these China connections, all these Ukrainian connections, there's sex, drugs, and all that kind of stuff. How are we going to, there's so much information. How can it even be entertaining? How can you cover at least the most important elements even? It would be so much. And so to me, the inspiration was the movie The Big Short, which was a movie that dealt with this whole complex thing about the 2008 collapse in the real estate and all that stuff. And they used humor to allow them to jump time and space and interact with the audience, and allowed you to get a lot of information over, but by making it a humorous context. So that was my concept. I thought that's what we got to do. And of course, if it's about the laptop and, thinking Hollywood style here.
Yeah, we should tell people this is not your ordinary conservative movie. This is funny. This is absurd. This is sexy. This has this should have government warnings on it for anti-corruption, humor, sex, drugs, rock and roll, more corruption, and more corruption. And it's and I think humor is tragedy plus time, and Hunter Biden's life is tragic, tragic because of the tragedy he has suffered, external tragedies, losing his mother and his sister and then losing his brother. But then tragic in that he was the son of Joe Biden, who viewed him in the end, as a bagman, viewed him as a way to get rich rather than a vulnerable human being who needed to be looked after. So it's we do, one thing none of us wanted to do was demonize Hunter Biden. Um, and I think we've done that. We haven't demonized him, but he is a man. He is a man with demons, though.
Absolutely. And going into this, we're like, okay, because of his fascinating interpersonal relationships, there's enough drama there that we can deal with his flaws yet remain human. And like what you said is, honestly, I do think at whatever level people may look at the quality of this film, whatever level they see it as, I do think that we have this is a breakthrough movie in that we do have the Hollywood level quality writing, directing, and producing of a movie, and the content. Like you said, the way we deal with the content. Usually, conservative movies, they're either documentaries because they're all information oriented, or they just don't have the sense of humor. I mean, it's not like they're not humorless. I mean, we've got memes on Twitter, we're meme kings, right? Conservatives. But in terms of movies, being able to pull off something satire that's really edgy, and it breaks, pushes the envelope, it's a little, we've got some risque, stuff in the stripper club and drugs and all this stuff, but we're trying not to exploit it, but to show the true reality of this world, and then allow that to be the doorway, the entertainment doorway, sex and drugs, right? That's the entertaining doorway that draws us into, along with his personal relationships, into all the other material, which is connected to the crimes of the, Biden crime family syndicate.
I think it's important also to remember, this story, as you were saying, was censored by big tech, was censored by the mainstream media. And this is why it's important to get it out there. And it's why it's important it's a movie that's accessible to so many millions of people. Because this was a story that the big tech and the mainstream media don't want you to see. So let's see it. And that's why they sent a spy. I mean, Hunter Biden sent a spy to infiltrate our movie set for 3 days to interview everyone there, posing as a documentary filmmaker. It was his lawyer and 2 other investigators posing as a documentary crew. Maybe they're also part-time documentary filmmakers, I don't know. But it was all about getting dirt on this movie to try and stop it. And so they are scared of this, which is great.
Have they released any of their footage or whatever? Have they made any claims yet?
No. I assume that will come after we release it, and to try and discredit it. Listen, I'm not scared. We could stand over everything. As the movie says at the beginning, this is not a true story except for all the facts. Which was my line, wasn't it, Brian?
Oh no, baby! But you know what, though?
No, I think Brian. I think you're mistaken, Brian. That was my line.
Actually, that's a great line. We don't want to spoil too many of the great lines in the movie, but that's a great line that it opens with. But the heart and soul of that was first, inspired basically by the Fargo, the guy who are the Coen brothers, right? I was thinking the Coen brothers vein, but the truth is it is the truth, because the essential story that we do tell is the entertaining part, which is, and I'll try to keep it, I won't reveal too much, but Hunter basically goes to his favorite dance club because he's depressed, and he meets this beautiful dancer, and he kind of falls in love with her. Well, she's a fictional character that's based on real true stuff that he's done in the past, but that fictional context allows us to be able to then have the interchange between him and her as we start to uncover what's in the laptop, right? So that's it's a fictional story on that level, but then all the revelations that are coming out, that's the fact stuff. So the line, it's perfect because it shows that, look, this is satire, but it's not made up and it's not slanderous. The facts are actually truthful. So I don't know. I thought it was a perfect line, yet also has that edgy humor to it.
I'm sure I wrote that line.
Okay, yeah, I do want to work with you again. So you did a good job on that line.
Yeah, what would you say? I wrote 90% of the movie?
See, okay, so for our audience, They have to know the insider joke that's going on here is that I'm always worried about making sure I get the credit for what I've done, because as the typical writer in Hollywood, we get pushed aside and we don't get the credit, so I'm always fighting, hey, make sure I'm on the podcast, make sure you tell I wrote it, so.
And Brian, I would say, in all honesty, did you write 95% of the movie? 97%?
Yeah, something like that.
Actually, Robert Davi would have added some lines.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I did work with Robert, and so that's the thing about development is, of course, along the development route, you guys, each of you would say, oh, put this in there, put that in there. So yeah, there's people, are contributing. And then I, as the writer, try to craft it and make it all work together. So
Yes, we say we'd love this story in there, and then you fit it in. But it has to keep the plot going. It has to keep the story going. We just can't put things in because they're our favorite bugbears. It has to be part of the story, and it has to develop along. And sometimes a big story that we think should go in can be told in 2 lines better than a big story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to also acknowledge that, look, it is the writer's perennial thing, that, we're forgotten and all this kind of stuff. But look, I understand people want to see, Gina Carano, Robert Davi, the celebrities. I get that. And I understand that, because even myself, my favorite movies, I don't necessarily remember the writer. It's the director and the actors and all that. So that's fine. And I know that that's how that works. And so I'm hoping that actually will be a benefit, that people will stand up and say, okay, these aren't just nobodies with bad actors in the movie, but they've got some actual name power to them.
No, we've got great actors. Actually, there's no bad performances in this movie. It's great. And, you can make a bad movie out of a good script, but you can't make a good movie out of a bad script. You cannot do that. It is impossible. If the lines are not human, if the lines are not entertaining, if they don't pop off the page, then you will never have a good movie. And to be fair, Brian, your lines pop off the page, and I often wonder how an evangelical Christian like yourself can get into such a dark and depraved place. So, is there something you're not telling us, Brian?
Actually, it's interesting you say that. I'll keep this short, but in a way, I actually come from a Reformed background, and in a way, Christians we are the ones who believe man is original. We believe in original sin, right? We believe man is basically evil, and the world is the one that says, "Oh, you idiots calling people evil. No, man's basically good." So if I'll acknowledge that a lot of Christians, are pretentious. They think they're holy and righteous, but truly, we should be the ones most understanding of the sinful, evil nature, because we believe we all have it in us.
Yes, of course. That's the difference between conservatives and liberals, by the way. Is conservatives believe man is flawed. Liberals believe man is essentially good, and if only we give them money and things, they'll become better, and the world become better. Conservatives believe man is flawed, and if you give them, if you hand too much, or make, just don't upset society, then they will get worse rather than better. And funny, completely off topic, kind of. I think this is why you get all these articles. How can evangelical Christians support Trump? And it's like, they understand sin, they understand redemption, they understand imperfect vessels for good news. Paul persecuted Christians. Matthew was a tax collector. This is why a Christian like yourself can write about a flawed, tragic human being.
And by the way, because I know my own evil nature, but for the grace of God, God works on me regularly. But because I'm honest with my own sinful nature, it allows me to write a character like Hunter Biden, who I believe is deeply flawed, but I still seek to maintain his humanity. Again, so this is why we don't reduce people to ridiculous caricatures like many Hollywood political satires do, right? And hopefully we've achieved that. That's what I think we've set out to do. Absolutely. Another thing too about the Trump thing. So, you bring that up, and I think it's relevant to this movie, because we've already been, labeled as MAGA filmmakers in Vice magazine, right? And the truth is that, I mean, I think I speak for most of us, where, let me put it this way: the liberal the liberals often see it as this black and white. You're either like Trump worshipers, which are idiots and all this, or you're a Democrat or something. But the truth is most of really all the conservatives that I lived around and worked around and interact with, none of us were Trump worshipers. We voted for him, but we knew his flaws and we understood his flaws, but he was still better. And like you're saying, to lift up Trump was not to be a MAGA person necessarily. It was just to acknowledge he's still a better leader and would be a better leader for the country. And that's this nuance that I think the liberal world doesn't get. And so they paint us as something, a false picture of what we are.
I think they don't want to get it because it raises awkward questions. Then they have to face Trump's ideology, right? And what he stands for. And that's a hard thing to argue against because it was demonstrably better for America domestically and in a foreign context as well.
Yeah.
Yes, as I was saying, we have to end it now, Brian, and I feel bad. I haven't even given you a hard time for deserting us in California and running away to Texas. So thank you very much for talking to us. Where can people get you?
Everything's at Godawa.com, my name, Godawa.com, my film work and little short videos, but also a lot of all the novels that I've written. All my novels are on Amazon.com. Just look up under my name and there'll be a whole slew of them.
Yeah, so it's Brian Godawa and it's Godawa.com. And you do biblical fiction, which is taking parts of the Bible and fictionalizing, the untold parts. Fascinating stuff. Thanks, Brian. All the best. MySonHunter.com. Maybe as you're reading this or listening to this, it's out already. The news is out already, but it's amazing news. So MySonHunter.com.
And earlier I spoke to Wesley Smith of the Discovery Institute. This past weekend, some of you might have read an amazing, shocking article in AP about the new euthanasia laws in Canada. I want to go over to that interview right now and listen to what Wesley has to say. He's the world expert on euthanasia and assisted dying, as they call it. So let's go over to that right now. So I'm really happy now to be joined by Wesley Smith. Wesley is the chair and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Centre on Human Exceptionalism. He's the author of more than 14 books, in recent years focusing exclusively on human dignity, liberty, and equality. His most recent book is his updated and revised Culture of Death, The Age of Do Harm Medicine. I wanted to say those words very clearly, which was named one of the 10 most outstanding books of the year and best health book of the year by Independent Publishers Association. He's been recognized as one of America's premier public intellectuals on bioethics by a national journal and was honored by the Human Life Foundation as a great defender of life for his work against suicide and euthanasia. And he's a great friend of mine. Welcome to the show, Wesley.
Thanks, Anne. Good to see you.
I just over the weekend, I read this, very lengthy story on AP entitled Disturbing Experts Troubled by Canada's Euthanasia Laws. And of course, I thought of you. One quote in it stood out, and I want you to comment on this. They talked to somebody called Tim Stainton, who's the director of Canadian Institute for Inclusion and Citizenship at the University of British Columbia, who described Canada's law, the euthanasia laws in Canada, as probably the biggest existential threat to disabled people since the Nazis' program in Germany in the 1930s. That's quite a statement. Can you talk to us about what's going on in Canada?
Yeah, people in this country in particular, the United States, think that euthanasia is about terminal illness, and that's not true. That's where it starts, but it very quickly can spread. And some of the most, I think, effective and committed opponents of assisted suicide and euthanasia are disability rights advocates. Why? Because they see themselves as the target. They see people with disabilities as the target of this death agenda. So I'm really glad that AP actually quoted somebody from that community, because usually the mainstream media tries to pretend that opponents of euthanasia are just people with Catholic priest collars or pro-life activists, and that's not true. The opponents of euthanasia are broad, diverse, and they are committed to human rights.
And it seems, so euthanasia is available in about 7 countries in the world, am I right? And of them, Canada, for some bizarre reason, is the most extreme.
Canada is becoming the most extreme. The Netherlands and Belgium are certainly well up there. Let's see, we've got Germany has an absolute right to suicide and assisted suicide for any reason, according to a court ruling. We can talk about that if you'd like. Switzerland has suicide clinics to which people fly from around the world to be made dead. Most of the states of Australia have now legalized euthanasia. Luxembourg has it. Colombia has it. So it's getting closer to, and of course, 9 or 10 states in the U.S. have assisted suicide, but not lethal injection euthanasia. So I would say it's, millions of people live in countries where euthanasia or assisted suicide are legal.
It seems to me that the medical establishment in Canada are almost grabbing this as a kind of an answer to the problem of people with long-term disabilities and long-term, chronic illnesses, and that they're grabbing this as a great way to save money. I mean, is it as crude as that?
Not quite. They certainly don't admit that's the reason, although there have been articles about the millions of Canadian dollars that have been saved because of euthanasia. But it makes sense because the people who are eligible for euthanasia in Canada now are people with terminal illnesses, people with chronic illnesses, people with serious disabilities. Soon, next year, it'll be people with mental illnesses and people with dementia. Now, if you start knocking off people with dementia, now you're really beginning to talk about a resource issue and a money issue. So while advocates always like to talk in terms of compassion, there certainly is a utilitarian aspect to this issue.
I mean, one of the things that I thought about the AP article that was most disturbing was that one that I'm sure you've read it, that one patient who actually taped the ethicist, by the way, the ethicist from the hospital who came to visit, I think it was a gentleman, and said, well, if we're to take care of you here, it's going to cost $1,500 a day, and I'm just here, and the patient said, what are you suggesting? And he said, look, here's the thing, have you thought about us helping you to die? I mean, and he taped the ethicist in the hospital saying that. And apparently that's not against the law in Canada for someone in a hospital to suggest this as a solution.
Here are a couple of other things that aren't against the law. In Ontario, at least, if somebody applies for euthanasia, which they call MAID, M-A-I-D, medical assistance in dying, they always like their euphemisms because it deflects from what's actually being done. While the organ donation society that's in charge will contact the person who's going to have euthanasia and say, can I have your organs? So we now have in Canada, in Belgium, and in the Netherlands, euthanasia conjoined with organ harvesting. And the idea that you could donate organs after being killed is actually could be a tipping point for somebody, particularly with mental illnesses. In the Netherlands and in Belgium, people with mental illnesses are euthanized and their organs harvested with consent. But you can just imagine somebody who's having a difficult time getting through the night thinking, wow, my death would have greater value for society than my life. It's very dangerous. I predicted this back in 1993. My first anti-euthanasia piece was published in Newsweek after a friend of mine killed herself under the influence of the Hemlock Society, which is now called Compassion and Choices. But back then it was more honest in how they described themselves. And I said, if we go down this road, then we will end up with organ harvesting as a plum to society because, well, we might as well get organs out of this. And I was called an alarmist and we would never do that. Well, now it's happening. And I'm glad you're bringing up Canada because that's really germane to the United States. In the past, when I said, well, look at the Netherlands, they even have infanticide in the Netherlands where babies born with serious illnesses or disabilities are killed in their bassinets. People would say, oh, well, that's the Netherlands. It's not the United States. Well, Canada's our closest cultural cousins. And, there's a cross between Europe and the U.S. and Canada. But if it can happen in Canada, it can happen here. And in fact, the the philosophy of euthanasia and assisted suicide, the idea that killing is an acceptable answer to human suffering, of course, means you're not going to leave it as for the terminally ill. And that's not right either, because it's a form of abandonment. But because there are a lot of people who suffer far longer and far more seriously than dying people. And I would also point out about Canada that only 15% or so of patients there have access to quality palliative care. So it kind of becomes a kind of like a chute for being put out of your misery, and it's really wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the strengths of so this article that I wanted to refer that you wrote recently, and you wrote it for the Epoch Times. You talked about euthanasia's cruel compassion, and I think I said it to you before. I've sent it to everyone. I just thought it was really powerful, particularly because of the stories. So the first two stories in it are awful, but then the subsequent stories where you talk about personal friends, I think are life enhancing and inspirational, and everyone needs to hear about these people. But I want to start with the beginning of the article. You talk about two stories, two euthanasia stories, but the second one is the one I want to start with, which is a COVID story, and it's a dreadfully sad story. So you write about a woman called Nancy Russell, a 90-year-old woman in Canada, who was isolated because of COVID. Can you tell us what happened to Nancy Russell?
Nancy was a woman going through COVID, as often happened here in the United States, where there was a lockdown and she was isolated, which I think was terribly cruel here and in Canada. And then the lockdown ended, and there was going to be a second lockdown. And she said, I can't take this anymore. I can't take this isolation. My health is bad. And she asked for euthanasia. And the thing that was really remarkable is she wanted euthanasia because she couldn't stand the idea of being isolated and away from her family again. But when she was killed, they let her family be with her when she was lethally injected. And so you have a situation in which where to help her live, the family couldn't be with her. But when she wanted to die, the family could. It's one of the cruelest things I've ever seen.
Oh, it's a terrible story. Oh my God, it's so arresting. But to try and we now need to cheer people up, Wesley, and I think we can so effectively. And that's why I love this article and why I really wanted to talk to you. I want you to tell us about your two friends. I want you to start by talking about Mark O'Brien, who contracted polio in 1955 when he was 6. And then had to live the rest of his life in an iron lung. Obviously, about the most.
Yeah, Mark O'Brien was a remarkable man. He, as you said, contracted polio when he was 6. He lived the rest of his life almost all the time in an iron lung. And yet during that time, he was able to go to UC Berkeley and get a degree. He became an independent journalist and a poet. He was a leader in the independent living movement in Berkeley, California. And I met him because he interviewed me about assisted suicide. He was an adamant opponent of assisted suicide. He basically said that the whole movement was to get people like him out of quote normal people's faces, and he was an adamant opponent, as are most people who are activists with disabilities. And Mark, he lived a full and complete. He had girlfriends, and so most of us would say, oh my gosh, what a horrible thing to be in an iron lung. And Mark, let's just be honest. Mark once told me if he could not have had polio, he would have been happy to be a custodian or anything, because it was a very difficult life, but he made the most of it. And he said, and he insisted that his life was worth living, that his life was equal. And he was a remarkable man, to the point that actually there was a documentary made about his life called Breathing Lessons. It won an Academy Award. I urge people to watch that documentary because it'll show you my wonderful late friend. He lived to be 50 and eventually died of post-polio syndrome. But he took life and he lived it with gusto and under the most difficult and extreme circumstances.
And I like that line in where you write about, that you said to him at the end of his life, you said to him, would you change anything? And he says, well, I wouldn't have got polio, that he had that, obviously that light touch, that humor. And as you say, lived a very full life. I also want you to tell us about the other story of your other friend. So that was Robert Salamanca. Tell us who he was and what happened to him.
Robert Salamanca was a man who had been a floor person who put in hardwood floors and so forth, his own business entrepreneur. He'd been a boxer, and he came down with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, sometimes called motor neuron disease. And at the time I met him, I was a hospice volunteer, and Robert was assigned for me to be there. And he told me that for a period of time after he was diagnosed, that he wanted to go to Jack Kevorkian. And Jack Kevorkian's been gone a while, but back in the 90s, Jack Kevorkian was an assisted suicide, most famous person assisting suicides in the world, where people would fly to Michigan and he would put them to death with carbon monoxide canisters in his rusty van. I mean, it was a terrible thing. And Kevorkian was a ghoul. And I won't get into all the details, but his ultimate goal was not to relieve suffering, but to be able to conduct human experimentation, which he called meticide. And yet the media turned him into this hero. Well, his family, Bob's family, would not take him to Kevorkian, even though he wanted to go, because he was so depressed. And what made him so depressed wasn't so much the illness, which was difficult without question, but he said he felt isolated in the world. People stopped seeing him. When he went to his priest, he had been a Catholic, the priest would only give him 5 minutes, and it just totally depressed him. But he came out of the fog, he said, and he became included because some people, Latter-day Saints, came to his door, actually. I didn't put this in the article.
Oh, very interesting. No, please tell me. I love it.
Yeah, they came to his door and they said, "Look, we'll include you." And he became, what is sometimes called Mormon. And because part of being a Mormon man is you're supposed to give lessons for Sundays, and they were so inclusive that they would bring cameras over for him to video them. And I remember one of the things that was really remarkable is that I think they called it the Women's Auxiliary, and Robert's wife had to work so that they could stay in their house and so forth. That meant he had to be alone, but he needed help peeing, and 2 women would come over, and they would do it discreetly, where they would put a bottle up the leg of his jumpsuit or his sweatpants and help him pee. These were both 2 married ladies, and it was such a service to him, such a benefit. He was able to stay home. He was able to feel like he was at the cause of the world. And he was so glad, he told me, that he hadn't committed suicide. And he actually wrote a piece for the San Francisco Chronicle decrying the assisted suicide movement and euthanasia movement, because the way he put it is they were trying to force him off the well-lighted boulevard into the dark alleyways. And he said, "I do not want, quote, the right to die. I want to live, and I want people to respect me." And people should read that article, because, the media, again, only says, well, this is them dying on their own terms. Well, often people dying, quote, on their own terms is because they have not yet received the kind of services and engagement. We've certainly seen that in Canada, that will help people want to live. Instead of helping people want to die and helping them die, let's help them want to live.
Yeah. Oh my God. And that article you refer to is from February 1997 in the San Francisco Chronicle, called "I Don't Want a Choice to Die." And as you say, before he died, I love, there's a quote that you had in your piece. He said, "In my view, the pro-euthanasia followers' posture is a great threat to the foundation upon which all life is based, and that is hope." Bob wrote, "I exhort everyone, life is worth living and life is worth receiving. I know, I live it every day." So just really fabulous. And I want, my last kind of question to you was, have you noticed in the media and in entertainment a kind of a promotion of this culture of death that you described, this culture of death? I mean, the very big example I give people is this awful movie and book called Me Before You, this romantic book with a character, the main character, who becomes a quadriplegic and then, goes to Dignitas, asks this woman that he falls in love with to bring him to Dignitas. And you're meant to, think, it's not just a great, lovely story there. Have you noticed...
Dignitas is a suicide clinic in Switzerland.
Yes. Have you noticed a promotion of euthanasia in the media?
Oh, tremendous. And in popular culture. Another movie is Million Dollar Baby, I think it's called. Uh, yeah, the woman's a boxer and becomes quadriplegic, and the coach, instead of helping her find another way to go forward in life, kills her at her request. So, I mean, yes, you see that, and you also see it in the media. The media doesn't even, the mainstream media generally doesn't even include opponents of this agenda in their stories anymore. I used to get calls from literally the biggest news outlets in the world to comment, and then at some point, oh gosh, probably around 2000 or so, those calls stopped. Now they only present the pro-euthanasia side. It's almost as if there are no anti-euthanasia people. And also then they'll do stories like, for example, of suicide parties or euthanasia parties, going away parties. Brittany Maynard, who committed assisted suicide after she got brain cancer, was lauded in the media and lionized in the media. She had huge People magazine cover stories, and CNN named her one of the outstanding women or extraordinary people of 2014 because she killed herself. So yeah, there's a great promotion of this agenda in the popular culture and in the mainstream media.
And I think there's also, I mean, it's sort of adjacent, morally adjacent to that is this celebration of suicide. I mean, there was a time, which probably was wrong, but I'm revisiting this. There was a time when a person who committed suicide would not be buried in hallowed ground. They were buried in commonage, as a way to say that actually it's a sin. It's actually a sin to take your own life. It's a sin to take another person's life, but it's a sin to take your own as well. Now we see a tendency, and I've seen it in Ireland, by the way, where if a young person, or anybody, by the way, but particularly with young people, a young person, for example, in a high school kills themselves, the school do a kind of it becomes this like very celebratory and very, there's a guard of honor, and the kids are all taken out of school, and it's all done kind of in a very, and if you can imagine yourself being a child who feels like that they don't fit in, or that nobody notices me, or the normal stuff that kids feel, to suddenly be the center of attention and to realize that I have a way of being the center of attention here. I could be the one. They could be all looking at me now. What do you think of that? There seems to be a definite fashion for that I've noticed.
I still think that there's a general decrying of youth suicide and an attempt to prevent youth suicide. But suicide prevention has become, I think, eclipsed by euthanasia and assisted suicide advocacy. So we're back, let's say 20 years ago, you'd see a lot of attention to suicide prevention. You see much less today. And I also, in part, blame the suicide prevention organizations because they never give even lip service to the idea that this assisted suicide movement is promoting suicide. There's no other way to say it. It's promoting suicide. Now, sometimes they'll say, well, it's not really suicide, but of course it is. Suicide isn't why you do it, it's what you do. And so suicide prevention, I think, has fallen down on the job. I think the hospice movement has kind of become gun shy or has become timid in opposing assisted suicide. Yet the founder of hospice, Dame Cecily Saunders, one of the great medical humanitarians of the 20th century, who I got to interview for Culture of Death before she died, was an adamant opponent of assisted suicide because she said it denied the equal dignity of her patients. And even in suicide prevention campaigns, you never hear them say, well, if somebody asks for assisted suicide because they're terminally ill, call for prevention. In fact, you even have an occasional prevention organization saying that people in that condition should not receive suicide prevention. It really is a profound abandonment.
Oh my God. I want to wrap this up now, but I want to kind of ask you to if you could finish this interview by giving us some hope. Where do you see light in this? Because it does seem like, your book, The Culture of Death, unfortunately seems to be that culture seems to be winning a lot. I see a lot of evidence of that winning. Do you see any light?
I think that the real question is, how many lives can we save? I mean, there's only so much you can do in terms of affecting the culture. Everyone should stand against assisted suicide. We should defend people. For example, if somebody says to you, a friend, well, if I was like that disabled person over there, I'd want to kill myself. come to the defense of that person's intrinsic value, and that all of us have a right to be here and have the ability, if we receive proper interventions, to have a meaningful and worthwhile life. But remember, it's not about winning and losing. It's how many lives can we save. And the more we resist assisted suicide, the more we resist euthanasia, the more we insist that people in those situations of a disability or terminal illness receive the kind of interventions that make them included in society, the fewer will want to kill themselves, and that should be our ideal. And of course, doctors should all say, look, this is an assisted suicide-free zone. I will not participate.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Wesley. And thank you for everything that you do for life and for promoting life and life in its fullest. You're an inspiration. I love your pieces. As I said, I always share them wildly. And I particularly recommend people, I'm going to put a link to everything, by the way, so that people can find more about you and more about what you write about. Thank you for everything that you do. Great chatting to you, Leslie.
Well, that's very kind of you, Anne. And please give my best to Phelan.
I will. Okay. Thank you. I think the main thing is I think everyone should watch Breathing Lessons, the documentary Breathing Lessons. I've already checked out online and it's available for like $2.50 everywhere. And I highly recommend it. I think just an extraordinary and inspiring story. And we need more of them, not less.
Yeah.
And talking about death and dying.
Anne Heche, she tragically died. In fact, she died a few miles from our house here. Known star in movies such as Psycho, movies with Harrison Ford. She's famously known as Ellen DeGeneres' girlfriend. She died 3 or 4 miles up. We drove past the scene of the accident the same day, actually, not realizing it. Some facts about her death. Now, the media are saying certain things, but let's have some facts about her death. She had fentanyl and cocaine in her system when she died. She was behaving bizarrely, had an accident and drove off, and then
at huge speed,
drove into at reckless speed, drove into a house very near here. The house went on fire. The woman lost her life possessions, got away with her life.
The woman who was in the house could have been killed.
Yeah. So just listen to the media spin on this and her life. This is Justin Chang from the Los Angeles Times. And it talks about her career. And then he says, sometime after that, the big star vehicles stopped coming her way. Heche claimed in interviews that her much publicized relationship with Ellen DeGeneres had torpedoed her chances as a viable leading lady. And this is Justin Chang now. Given the still rampant Hollywood homophobia of the early 2000s, and was and still is hard to refute the truth of her claim. And it's like, Hollywood was not homophobic in the 2000s. Hollywood was homophiliac. This idea that Hollywood was this cold place for homosexuality. It's just a joke. It's a laugh. It's rewriting history. It's fake news. Look, Anne Heche had the world's worst upbringing. Her father sexually abused her all her childhood. Her mother rejected her, apparently. She also lost 3 siblings to death. So 3 of her siblings died, and she's only 53, died before her. So she'd had a terrible life, and she obviously had a tumultuous personal life and tumultuous way of dealing with the world, and obviously had substance abuse issues. And maybe that's why she never became the leading lady. That's a much more
nuanced,
but also probably truthful and honest reason why she never reached the lead.
But never let a tragedy go to waste.
Yes,
that you can potentially pulverize for some kind of political motivation.
Yeah, and then this is then he goes on to say, Justin Chang in the Los Angeles Times, nor was it the last time that tumult would be swept into the opening, as evidenced this past week by rampant online speculation over the fiery death crash that led to her untimely death. Like all idle gossip, it threatens to flatten the deeper truth of a human life and obscure the work of a remarkable career. It's not idle speculation. It's not idle gossip. She had cocaine and fentanyl in her system. She was involved in an accident, drove off from that accident at reckless speed and crashed into a house. This is actually journalism. It was the Daily Mail and people like this.
And there was actually a photograph. There was a photograph taken after the first collision she had, where she was actually having a conversation with a bystander. And there's actually a photograph that the Daily Mail had, which showed a liquor bottle. Now, whether or not it turns out there was no alcohol in her system, but it is journalism actually to report that, because it's of public importance.
Yes, it is. It is. So.
But it's not it's not the only big story we had recently. The other really big story that we had was the attempted murder of Salman Rushdie at a literary event.
Yeah. Salman Rushdie, who wrote the Satanic Verses, who had a fatwa, a death sentence claimed on him by the Iranian leadership. Let's just remember, he's not the first person to suffer. The Japanese translator was killed. The Italian translator was killed. The Turkish translator was almost killed. The Norwegian publisher was shot 3 times. I mean, look,
it's extraordinary.
This is, I remember I was in London working in a bookshop, working in Salman Rushdie's local bookshop in 1989 when the fatwa, 1989-90 when the fatwa was announced, and I remember it well. And he received round-the-clock protection from the Margaret Thatcher British government. He was anti-Thatcherite. He was a lefty. The bookshop was in Islington, North London. He would have hated Thatcher, I'm sure, but she had no hesitation in providing him with massive resources. Like in his memoir, he said he moved from safe house to safe house. In the first 6 months, he had to move 56 times. And Boris Johnson, after he was stabbed this time, Boris Johnson has written, appalled that Sir Salman Rushdie has been stabbed while exercising a right we should never cease to defend. Well, the reality is, in your Britain, Boris Johnson,
yes,
Boris Johnson, let's be clear, if he tweeted out the Satanic Verses today, cops would be coming to his door
to
arrest him for hate crimes. That is the difference between you and Margaret Thatcher, Boris Johnson.
One of the many differences.
Many of the differences. You would have Salman Rushdie arrested whilst claiming to defend free speech. She didn't even, I'm sure she never read Satanic Verses and had no interest in it. But
she had an interest in free speech and in defending writers
and defending the borders of the UK from, you've presided over untrammeled immigration into the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, allowing people who have different culture and different values about free speech into the UK. And then you've also colluded with them by arresting people who exercise that free speech. So buzz off, Boris Johnson. But he's not the only one. I mean, I'm reminded now, and Barry Weiss was very good on this. She reminds us that back then, great writers like Tom Wolfe, Christopher Hitchens, Norman Mailer, Joseph Brodsky, Seamus Heaney, and Susan Sontag, who was then the president of PEN America, they arranged for the book to be read in public.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Fast forward 2015. PEN, which Sontag was president of, they were going to award Charlie Hebdo an award because earlier a dozen staff members had been murdered for publishing the Muslim cartoons. A response from as Barry Weiss said, and I would disagree with Barry on this, from 200 of the world's most celebrated authors was to protest the award. And by the way, maybe she's right. Maybe they are the world's most celebrated authors. Joyce Carol Oates, Laurie Moore, Michael Cunningham, Rachel Kushner, Michael Ondonachi, Terry Cole, Tishu Cole, Peter Carey. But I have to say, very interesting, I've heard about 2 of these writers. But
they've won loads of prizes.
No, but the point is, it's very interesting. The people who supported Salman Rushdie, Thomas Wolfe, Christopher Hitchens, Norman Mailer, Joseph Brodsky, and Seamus Heaney, and Susan Sontag, people will be reading their writing in 100 years' time. No one will be reading these people's writings. Maybe Joyce Carol Oates, maybe. It won't be reading in 10 years' time, I would predict. These are unknown people, and you know what? Maybe you're unknown because you don't love free speech. You're not adventurous. You're not literally adventurous. You're trapped in this bubble. You cannot go outside your bubble. Seamus Heaney was often criticized for not taking sides in the Northern Ireland conflict. And maybe he was right and we were wrong. Maybe that's what makes a great writer.
Well, it's not the job of the poet, by the way. That's not the job of art. to be involved in politics. You know,
Yeah,
they're not meant to be making. They're not meant to be making a point. They're meant to be making art.
Yeah, well, these people don't want Salman Rushdie to make art, and they don't want Charlie Hebdo to make art. And Seamus Heaney said people need to make art, and look who's more remembered than when it all comes out. So we also, talking of art, we went to see Here There Are Blueberries, which is an amazing play. It has to be said, an amazing play. You may remember someone found a photo album of the Nazis having a ball behind the scenes
and when they kind of
which concentration camp?
At Auschwitz, and when they started to look at this incredible discovery, this album of photographs, they quickly discovered, this was Auschwitz. They started to look at very closely at the photographs, recognize some of these very senior SS officers,
Yes.
and the basic thing that was the real standout about the album was that the album just showed them having just a fabulous time. They were having blueberries, and there was girls and really nice looking girls, the stenographers who worked in the offices.
There was a whole. This is something we discovered with Gosnell too. You have to remember, Gosnell, it was a mass murder mill, but it takes people to organize that. It takes drivers, it takes janitors, it takes superintendents, it takes office.
And in the
people.
case of Gosnell, people were earning a lot of money. People who wouldn't have normally been employed by anybody suddenly had tons of cash. They were getting tons of cash every night, and basically they were having a good time. And when that was one of the most disturbing parts of writing the book was reading, from the witnesses. We talked to lots of witnesses. We interviewed them, and to hear them tell about just the great time they were having. And there was jokes about somebody. There was a young girl there who farted apparently, and they made these fart jokes. And you have this idea that they were having all this fun in the midst of this carnage, in the midst of this diabolical environment, and actually. Talking of Auschwitz, it reminds of Hannah Arendt, her line, the banality of evil, and basically, and so some very bright spark of a person decided to make a play called Here There Are Blueberries, right? About this extraordinary album, about this incredible find.
So the album. It's not just that they were having a great time. It's that there was so much to administer when people think of Auschwitz as this massive killing machine, but there were people there who had to order the toilet paper, who had to make sure that there was petrol in the cars and that the place was cleaned, properly. The offices were clean. I mean, Auschwitz was this enormous. I think it was like 15 acres. And there was all these different camps. Like there's a major. So there was dozens of young women there passing messages from one to the other. It was like an office, and there was flirting and affairs and fun.
So they made a play of it, and we went to see the play in San Diego, in La Jolla, in a fabulous theater there, and an amazing performance. The whole thing was done so well, really amazing stagecraft. Like there was an amazing amount of use of multimedia, and it's very, very well done. But I think the thing what was a standout to us, because when we went to the play, so we were in the car on the way down, and we're thinking, well, they can't really be woke. I wonder how it'll be woke.
Actually, let's just put some of the photographs up now of the fun life behind bars, behind in the offices. So listen, you cannot imagine how well it was done. It was done from the point of view of people in the Holocaust Museum who got the album, and they looked at it, and then they went into the backgrounds and homes, and it's basically a verbatim play, like we've done for Ferguson, like we've done for Gosnell, like we did for Chevron trial, and what we did for the FBI Lovebirds. Part of it was reenacting interviews with these Nazis or court transcripts, and they had a transcript of an SS officer who's photographed, and it was a courtroom interview or an investigator interview, and the actor playing the SS Nazi was an African American, was black. And you're just sitting there going.
You're sitting there and you're hearing him, and you're hearing him speak, and then right beside it there's the photograph. There's the actual photograph of the man, and that's the whole powerful part of it, is that you see the actual photographs. But then you have to take into account, it's like, why did you do that? Why would you do that? Why would you choose this African American to represent the person in the photograph who's clearly not black? The person in the photograph is obviously an SS officer, German, white. And it's like, and we were kind of thinking, my God, no matter what they do, they can't help themselves. They have to do this wokery. Completely unnecessary. And
completely.
The play was so good, by the way. The play was so well done. And it kind of ruined it, because it's like, God, can you not just let it go? Can you not just at least be honest, be really honest
Be
about,
historically
and be
honest.
historically honest, be accurate.
Because that's
you know,
what this show was all about. This play was all about the historical accuracy and how these photographs helped us get a sense of the day-to-day life. And then,
and the truth was, some of the characters on stage were people from the library, from the Auschwitz, from the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and you had them speaking, and some of them were black, and it's like, yeah, that's fine, because obviously they could be Chinese and different people, and that totally made sense. It didn't take you out of the play at all. But to sit there and have an African American represent the person who's in the photograph that's right beside them, and you think, why did you decide to do that? But they just cannot help themselves.
No, they can't. Yeah, because there was already plenty of minority representation in the play, but they just couldn't help themselves. They just stopped us getting involved. They just took us right out of the play and thinking, what the heck is this? Because
you're kind of going, what? This doesn't make sense. But anyway, we've come to the end of this week's podcast. As we said, by the time you watch this, I think you'll have heard some quite extraordinary news, and you've seen us, I hope. Anyway, you'll have heard great news about the My Son Hunter movie.
So go to mysonhunter.com. Bye.
Bye.